Very happy to welcome Antony Hausdoerfer. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That's perfect, Sarah. Well done.
Excellent. Thank you. First challenge over. Antony has had a very successful career, currently CIO at the EAA. I'm right in saying, Antony, you came from the project program management route, working as head of programs at 3, IT director at Avis, and obviously more recently in your current role. It would be great to delve into some questions and hopefully give our audience some real insight to you and your background and experience. Does anybody ever want to become a CIO, I guess? I mean, is that kind of a childhood dream? But when did you know that you wanted to become a CIO? And what was the biggest risk or decision you had to make to get there?
I think you're right. Has anyone ever come out of education thinking, that is my aspirational job? And I wouldn't say it was one that I'd intended on. Certainly, my background was more in marketing, but in sort of immediately as part of that, it was how to use technology to support marketing, and then it would be the internet was just starting to take off, and how could you use the internet to support marketing, support sales, to support business? So I think the thing that really attracted me to the role is it's the ability to look at how technology can enable businesses and can enable customers to engage with businesses and enable colleagues to work better. So it's right at the heart of business efficiency and business capability, which is, I think, the thing that I found really interesting. And it was a little bit accidental because I'd always regarded myself as not particularly technical, when clearly that wasn't necessarily the truth. It was just a perception I had of myself. And actually, as you start to unpick that, you realize you are quite technical. I was able to bridge the technology to business conversation, which isn't always an easy skill. Often it can be quite technical and hard for people to engage with. How can you make that simple for people to understand and actually take that complex technology problem and turn it into a business solution that people can identify with and can engage with? So that was, I think, the bit that attracted me, because it's also about joining up what people want with something they might not know they want at that point. So there's a people aspect of that as well, and getting the best out of people.
Yeah. So you didn't kind of set out on a track to kind of, I guess, progress your career down that CIO route. It kind of has almost happened by accident through that ability that you have to be that kind of conduit between the technical teams and the business. Is that what you're saying?
It wasn't a natural evolution. I can remember a conversation I was having with my wife in the car once about, I wasn't entirely sure about kind of taking the next step. This was actually, I think, pretty pre-Avis, as I was making that move from 3 to Avis, and you kind of said, well, why not? Because that's what you do really well. And then you kind of, when someone else tells you something, you have a bit of a reflection mode. You think, actually, it is something I actually do like and would like to do. And I think I do it quite well. So it was interesting you don't always see yourself in a role, but other people see what you could bring to it. And that was quite enlightening, I think, for me, and perhaps something I wouldn't have seen unless we'd had that conversation in the car at the time.
Yeah. And was there kind of, you mentioned it was when you were still at Avis, was there kind of a natural fork in the road where you had to make a decision of going to that route, or was there a kind of decision that had to be made, or a risk that you had to take?
I guess it probably was a fork in the road. Whilst a lot of my project delivery activity was very technical. I mean, we at 3, when I was there the first time, we built the first mobile apps, and all of the systems you were going to use were still being designed. So you're building on technology that hadn't been used before, with stuff that hadn't been defined yet. So it was very technical and very evolutionary in terms of what you're doing, and very groundbreaking at the time. And then I was far more focused on the outcome. Does the project deliver the outcome, of which technology is one piece of it? And then it was the question of, actually, am I going to stay there? Am I going to focus on the technical solution? And I was looking at a couple of opportunities, and the one at Avis, for me, was really exciting, given what was happening in the mobility market, as we were looking at the kind of the advent of autonomous electric vehicles being something on the horizon, and how do you start to access that? It was just an exciting place to be. And I think the role, the responsibility, and I think the category all came together really well for me, and it was something I thought actually I could really add some value to it.
Yeah. And you obviously mentioned the influence your wife had on that decision making process. Any role at that level is demanding, right? And there's a certain amount of, I guess, balance that needs to happen in life, or striving for balance, I guess. How do you kind of manage that professionally and personally, being in a C-level role and balancing out your personal commitments as well?
I'm not sure I do, I suppose. Is you have to work really well together, and everyone has to lean in, and it's hard because you sometimes feel you're not there as much as you ought to be, but equally there are things that then you can enable through a role like this and the responsibilities that come with it. So it is a really hard one, and I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, we cracked it, here's exactly how it works. I mean, my wife's had very kind of challenging jobs, and she's now doing something more for herself, which gives her a bit more flexibility, which works really well for us. But we've got kids, and they're kind of in their teens, so they require a lot of support as well, and I don't feel I can always be as in that as I would like to be. And my wife steps in and does that incredibly well. So it's really hard. We all have to kind of find our way through it. And I suppose my observation on it is there'll be times when you think you're doing it well and times when you don't. Don't beat yourself up about it too much, because there is no easy path through it. We're all trying to get through this and do the best for our careers, our families, our children, and ourselves. To be fair, we have to look after ourselves in this too. There is no prescription for it. You just have to find your way through it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because we did an event last week about how to become a CIO, and every single person on our panel was an experienced, seasoned CIO, and they all said, don't try and strive for balance in family and work commitments, because ultimately it's almost impossible to do that. It's a constant juggling act, isn't it, between you're right, you need to look after yourself at some stage, your career at some stage, and your family at some stage, and trying to get balance probably is an unrealistic thing to aim for. So it's
I think it's good to strive for the balance, but don't beat yourself up if you get it wrong. Don't because there will be days you get it better than others. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about working for the AA is it's a UK based company on a UK time zone predominantly. I've worked in international jobs that have got a lot of travel. I see my kids pretty much every morning and pretty much every evening, and sometimes I don't if I'm away, and I like that. And actually COVID helped, I think, with that, and it was something that I didn't want to lose sight of. I think as we came out of that, I still wanted to have the ability to check in with my kids every morning, check in with them in the evening, witness the you haven't done your homework conversation, or not ready for school on time conversation, but just be there and be part of that.
Yeah, excellent. So I guess thinking about highs and lows of your career, because it can't all have been plain sailing, I'm assuming. Looking back then, over your career today, is there one thing that you would have done differently if you could have been given that time again?
It's a hard one, actually, because I don't. There's nothing that I look back and go, oh, that was a terrible choice or a terrible mistake to make. I suppose, if I'd be thinking about one thing, I did quite a long period, about 5 years. I worked almost as a consultant, a contracting consultant for Vodafone, again in the mobile internet space, and I really enjoyed the role. But because I was in that role, your career growth is a bit limited. You're there to do a role. You're not looked at to be promotable or someone who's going to necessarily take on additional responsibilities. At the same time, it meant that because I was a third party, that they wanted to have me around because I was easy to get rid of. I didn't have to feature in the conversations about the future. I was there and I was able to deliver what they needed me to. But then it did get to a period at one point where I thought I need to go back into a permanent role, to have the ability to do career progression. There's obviously not really anywhere I could go as a consultant. So yeah, that was a difficult choice, right choice. Actually, one of the turned out to be one of the best choices I made. But at the time, it was quite difficult. As a consultant, you can probably earn more money. You think you've got more flexibility in that sense. So I had to forego some of that. But again, it was at the time when my son was 2 years old. We're literally just at that point, literally just starting to expect our second. And I didn't want to be away 2 or 3 days a week. And I wanted to kind of get on with my career and be able to set those things out for the family. So yeah, it was a good and a bad thing. I think the outcome was I went back to work for the second time actually, and it was a fantastic time. Really enjoyed it.
That's probably a real common thing, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people fall into contracting due to circumstances, and then it's a really difficult, I guess, thing to get out of because it's lucrative, and I guess you're getting interested in challenging projects because you're typically going in at the early stages of projects when things are either happening or on fire and need fixing. But then I guess taking that decision is quite bold because you are having to, it's a risk, because what if you don't progress? And you risk that earning potential for career progression that might not ever happen. So it
came back, and it probably took about 18 months to kind of start to get back to parities to where I was. I had a promotion sort of soon after, but I felt better about it. And you're right, how you fall into it. I never necessarily expected to consult or to be a contractor, but I'd taken a year off. Actually, we'd been traveling with my now wife, and came back, and there were a couple of job opportunities I was looking at, and there was one which was, I'd been back 3 weeks, I could start work, it was lucrative. I probably at the time thought, good, I've got an income again, get back on. And actually I ended up doing it for 5.5 years. And I've met some great people through it, and I did thoroughly enjoy bits of it. But that after a couple of years, you start to see that there isn't progress. You'll keep on doing this, you'll earn good money doing it, but you won't necessarily get more responsibility and more progression. I think actually it gets a little bit frustrating, I think, at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess during that time then, when you kind of really started to progress your career, when you went back into a permanent role, was there anyone that had was an influential person? Did you have a mentor or anybody that helped you kind of guide you to get there?
There was a few influential people, and probably at the same time, it's almost people who didn't necessarily know they were being influential at the time. The lady who recruited me, who was the director who ran all of the delivery capabilities, very, very capable, real team player, brought the team together. She was excellent. But I think actually she moved into a new role sort of fairly early on, and one of my peers then took the role that she vacated. And again, another really strong, character lady, very, very good at what she did, but also really about the team, and just gave me constant feedback. And when you're relatively new in a business, probably less than a year, and you think you're doing well, it's quite important to get that feedback. It's quite important to get either the positive or the course correct that you need. And I got a lot of that from her. Then actually she moved on sort of fairly quickly, and we went through an internal recruitment process for the role, which I ultimately got. And before that, she went, just go in there and be yourself, the role's yours. Not that she had the decision, but that she believed in what I was able to go and do and how I was able to go and do it.
Yeah.
And that I was the right person to go and do it. And it turned out I was, I suppose, was the key as a result of that. I suppose, and there's been people sort of very early in my career that were quite influential, but it feels a bit wrong to say not so much now. But I suppose you get to a point in your career, and I think a point in your understanding that you have to kind of get out there and do it for yourself a little bit and believe in yourself a bit.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're working with people, you're not sure if they believe in what you're doing, but as long as you do, that's the key. because that's why you're in this, particularly for me in this role.
Yeah.
I have to bring something to it. I have to challenge. I have to identify a way forward for the organisation. And I'm in it every day, and they may not see it. Clearly, I get guidance from my colleagues and the peers and my team as well.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of go out on a limb a little bit and decide what the route is going to be and how we're going to get there.
Can it be quite lonely then as a CIO, given the fact that you have to, I guess you have to believe in yourself, you've got to back yourself and your strategy to be able to kind of come up with a plan, but also execute it. But I know you mentioned
it can be lonely, and I did think this sort of fairly recent. I was like, it can be a bit lonely, can't it? Who have I got to? I can't. Where I remember when before I took this role and I promoted internally into the role, I would be able to have some quite good just conversation with my peer group, the other directors who are running the different technology streams, and then I couldn't really do that as I took the role because they were either working for me or just didn't feel appropriate to have that kind of conversation, because you can always have a little gripe about how things are going and things that you see on a day-to-day basis, and then you have to kind of take that up a gear when you're taking on that new role, so you lose a little bit of that, which is a shame. It does feel a bit lonely sometimes. The other thing, which is very apparent with technology, is people rarely tell you they're happy when it's working. They're very quick to tell you when it doesn't work. So your ability to get positive feedback about some of the things that you're doing can be quite limited. You will always get negative feedback about things that aren't working perfectly.
Yeah.
But a lot of your technology these days, you just expect to work straight away, perfectly out of the box, and to never have any interruption to it. I think anyone who works in technology knows there's a hell of a lot of work that goes in to make that happen, and it doesn't always go perfectly. So yeah, it can be quite lonely from that perspective, but also it's a difficult role, particularly in technology, because we have such a high expectation of it, and unfortunately in a lot of cases that expectation is a little unrealistic, and takes a hell of a lot of investment and commitment to get it to that level. And when you're looking at investment, there are so many things you need to invest in. You have to try and find the right balance, so you might not have perfection on everything.
That leads me on really nicely to my next question. Like you said, it's a very wide ranging role where technology enables everything I can imagine the AA does as an organisation. What's keeping you up at night? What's kind of your biggest concern as a CIO today, would you say?
I'd say there's quite a few. Cyber is clearly the one that really keeps you awake at night, because that's the one that no matter how hard you work at it, you can be sure there are people on the outside working equally as hard on the attack as we are working on the defence. So I'd say that is one thing that definitely keeps me awake at night. Service, making sure that we can keep those services up, particularly with what we do. We support what is a critical service that supports the UK's motorists. We have to be able to get to them as quickly as we can and get them moving. And also, a lot of the time, they could be in a dangerous location. They could be on a motorway. So it's vital that we can get a patrol there as quickly as we can and get them moving again. Obviously, from an insurance perspective, we're a regulated business on that side, so we have to make sure that we've got the right level of service for our customers there. And then I think there's the people as well in my team. Everyone's working really hard. Are they getting the rest that they need? Are they being kept awake by some of these challenges too? Because everyone needs to have a little bit of time, a little bit of downtime, a little bit of rest time. So with all those things going on there, you don't feel there's a lot of rest time, and yet you do feel it interrupts your thoughts quite a lot. So to try and kind of get your mind away from it can be quite hard.
How do you do that, and how do you switch off?
I think it's something you just kind of get used to. You compartmentalize a little bit. You realise that it's work and it's not everything. Yeah, very important, but it's not everything. You have some good downtime with your family. Hobbies and exercise is a great way to kind of, you can't think about a lot of other things often when you're in the middle of some exercise. That really gets you a good reset time. Yeah. Yeah, and you find your opportunity. I like to listen to music, or also going to concerts and things like that. That kind of, you're in the moment, finding things where you're in the moment that takes you out of that potential for distraction. But I do still get woken up at night by things that are bubbling away at the back of my mind, and sometimes it's the things that you don't realise that surprise you that they actually woke you up, and then when you wake up in the morning and you go back to it, you think, why did that wake me up? That's not even that important. I can deal with that in 5 minutes this morning. It's an email. It's one simple thing, but it bothers you. So
yeah. And what's your exercise then? Have you got something that you're working towards, or are you just something that regularly exercises to switch off?
I do regular exercise to switch off, and also just, I don't know, I've always done it, I suppose. I've always kind of been quite active. I've done kind of distance races, marathons before, and half marathons, but I kind of got, I'm not saying I got convinced, but I got pulled into doing a Spartan Beast last year, which is it's a half marathon, but with a load of really quite difficult obstacles in.
Okay.
I'm not getting any younger, so I did question whether or not it was the right thing to do, but I loved it. It was brilliant, and I was quite pleased with how I did it. So
yeah,
got another one of those coming up. So that's quite, you've got to be able to run and have your kind of your general physical fitness, but you also need to have a lot of body weight strength, because you're swinging yourself around to do things and lifting awkward weights at awkward positions. So yeah, it's good. And also, again, it totally takes your mind off anything else. You have to focus on what you're doing. So
I can imagine, yeah, not a lot of thinking time when you're navigating that, by the sound of it.
And when you're struggling for breath and kind of trying to just keep your heart rate at a reasonable level and be in control of it.
Yeah. So thinking about as technology evolves, I always wonder this, just in terms of the pace of tech and how it works within an organisation like the AA. How do you keep current with innovation and trends as a CIO? So you can't know everything, right? You've got to rely on your people, but how do you do that?
We've got some great people. I think when you do definitely rely on your people, you rely on, I mean, you have to try and connect with people outside of your business as well, I think, to try and kind of keep a finger on the pulse. I also find I get approached 8 to 10 times a day with people wanting to offer me some insight that I must hear because it's the most important insight, and I find it quite difficult. I actually have to try and switch off to a lot of those because I just can't respond. I don't even have time to respond to them and do my job. One of the challenges that I see, particularly with an organisation like the AA, it's been around for over 115 years. So you can imagine we've got legacy technologies that we're addressing and modernising, and in some cases running and mitigating. And at the same time, we've got some very advanced technology capabilities that we're developing. Trying to exist in all of those zones is probably the biggest challenge. If we had a complete greenfield, it'd be very simple to go and take advantage of all of the new technologies available, and would be very exciting.
Yeah.
But you're bridging some quite legacy capabilities that you're working towards either modernising or replatforming or addressing, and they have to work in parallel with some of the more modern and advanced technologies. So trying to find the balance between the two of those is the bit that really kind of hurts a bit. It can be very difficult because you want to go really fast at something, but you can't because you're still having to address challenges of yesteryear that haven't necessarily been fully addressed yet. And we do a really good job of that. We've had such a big focus on modernising some of the kind of core legacy platforms that we're in a much better position. So now when I look at how can we get the right patrol to the right place at the right time with the quickest journey, with understanding where the patrols need to be at any given point in time based on the weather or based on the time of day or based on the day of the year. There is so much data that we have that we can bring into that conversation, I guess, and apply these new technologies to that. So yeah, it's really exciting, but at the same time, it's not easy when you're trying to balance all the different components.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd never really thought of that before about a business like the AA, but you really are a critical service as a business. So what you do is making a massive difference. I'm thinking about personal experiences when I've had a bump or tyre burst, which happened recently. I had my 2 kids in the car, side of the road, and was all very worrying and dramatic, and you don't probably realise how that must put quite a lot of pressure, I guess, on you as a CIO, but also your team to deliver that, given the criticality of it.
It is, and it's, actually that experience and making sure that experience for the patrol and the customer is hard, particularly when we cover the whole of the UK. We need to get information to our patrols all the time. They're very technologically, they're very dependent. They can fix anything with anything when it comes to a car, but we need to be able to get them information to support that via technology. Network connectivity can be really difficult to make sure they always have that when they're in the kind of wilds of remote parts of the country, because they still need that. We need that as well to know where are they, where can we get them to their next job, who's the nearest customer. So that one is a real challenge, and one we've really, I think, we've struggled with. It's not been easy. We're definitely improving at it, but it's a real focus for us. How do we get the best experience for them? And when we hear about some of the challenges they experience on a day-to-day basis at things like the AA Awards, the annual awards ceremony, the literal heroics that they perform, saving lives, which because they're often first on the scene or just before something happens, and they can really help. You feel a real responsibility to that, and it's hard when you don't feel you're achieving that for them. So there is a huge focus on that, trying to make that experience better for them. So yeah, it does really matter. It matters to the team. They really care about it. Yeah.
Obviously, as a CIO, you mentioned your team and is really important to you. And I guess you want a broad range of different opinions and experiences within a team. So I'm going to ask a little bit about diversity, because I guess that's quite critical to having those broad-ranging opinions and experiences and skills, etc. How do you keep your team diverse, inclusive, and equal when we all know that technology is such a male-dominated space? How do you achieve that at the AA?
It is a male-dominated space, and I chuckle about that sometimes with HR, because it is, I'll be honest, it can be quite aging, white, and male, and it is, and I can sit here saying that as an aging white male. I can point at that. Yeah. But we do work very hard at it. I think actually the AA is quite a diverse organisation and has set some quite challenging diversity targets and is achieving them. And my leadership team is 50-50 male and female. Okay. Certainly my ITLT, which is brilliant. And I don't want to say we didn't try too hard at that. I didn't want to set that as a target or as an objective. I just wanted to make sure that we had that in our mind. And the fact that we could achieve that by finding the best candidates is the thing that I'm most proud of. Actually, it wasn't contrived, it wasn't forced. We've just got great female talent in our business, and we found great female talent, and they're in our leadership team and they're in senior roles. I think overall we are probably about 2/3 male, 1/3 female, which I think is pretty normal, to be honest, in an IT industry, but it's definitely growing. So it's always something I think you have to be very aware of, but also what I wouldn't want to do is force it, because then I think you're doing a disservice to everyone by doing that. Yeah. But by developing great female talent and promoting that, it's been, I think, a really good experience at the AA for that.
And you mentioned earlier about obviously changing how you balanced personal and professional life, particularly post-COVID. When you did see a lot more of your children. Have you changed your approach to flexible working? Has that been a contributing factor to be able to help develop females into these senior leadership roles in your business?
I don't think necessarily as part of the AA, although we have a hybrid working policy. So you have a couple of days in the office and you have some days at home as well. And we're trying to make that be around those moments that matter. So coming in for those face-to-face meetings and trying to organise your diary around that. But I've always See, having seen my wife going off on maternity and how she was working and how hard she was working, I've always thought if you're in a situation where you've got someone looking for flexible working, particularly for women who've had children and what are coming back or going off on maternity, they will work so hard to make that work. Clearly you have to go through a review and make sure that it's appropriate for the role. But I've never ever seen an experience in certainly from my work, where they haven't made that work. And generally they're probably putting more in as a result of that. So you have to, then you're actually trying to find the balance there. So is that really realistic for you to be able to do 3 days a week? Are you going to end up doing more than 3 days a week and trying to find what's an appropriate balance? But I've never seen an issue, certainly in my career, where someone's asked for flexible working and they haven't worked really hard to make it work because they felt they had to, because otherwise no one else will get the opportunity to have that and they will have it taken away. So yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it, when you think, well, someone wanting to work part-time or fill a role part-time, that always looks to be a compromise. I don't think it is a compromise. I think in most cases it's an opportunity, and people will make it work. You can't have the whole workforce doing that, because it just wouldn't work. But actually, if you've got key skills and you really want to retain those key skills, and they'll work flexibly in order to allow you to retain those key skills, I'm very supportive of it.
Yeah, excellent. So then looking ahead, the year ahead, we're only at the early part of 24. What are your top 3 priorities this year as CIO at the AA?
We literally just started our financial year, so we've now got the whole spread ahead of us. So we've got some really kind of big projects to deal with. We've got a very large project that we need to finish this year. Next year we've got a big data migration activity which needs to succeed. So that is definitely one of the things on my radar. I'm obviously looking at the overall run cost at the moment. You know, we all know technology costs money. I'm trying to look at how we can be as cost effective and cost efficient as possible, so that we can start to unlock some investment to focus on some of the newer technologies that we want to get at. And then we touched on it, but that whole patrol experience and the employee experience, we've got a lot of work going on this year to modernize the laptop estate in the business. We're now going to be leasing our laptops, so that means that we'll be able to modernize that across the whole organization, looking at that around our desktops, and also looking at that how do we give a really amazing experience to our patrols at the roadside. So that they're the kind of the big things that are on my mind at the moment, things where I really want to move the dial this year.
Yeah. And what do you think is going to give you the biggest challenge out of those 3?
The one I least expect is always the one you least expect. The one you think you've got nailed is always the one that's going to come and bite you later on. Because you will have planned it really well, and there's always, with technologies, there's always the unexpected. There's always the unknown that will come along. The data migration piece, we've got a lot of good experience of doing that. We're very good at some of those activities, but there will be something deep and dark in one of these systems that we find. We go, well, why is that being done like that? And then we'll have to kind of take a step back, revisit it, work out the way forward, and carry on. But there's always going to be something that gets us.
Yeah.
And then it's the unknown. There's always what could happen. We're maintaining cyber protection. We're maintaining our system availability. We're trying to maintain all these things. If anything happens around that, you refocus immediately, because they're the things that run the business. If you haven't got system availability, you're not running your business. Running the business pays for the investment in the modernization, new technologies, etc. So that's the balance we have to strike on a daily basis.
How much of your time then, that's really interesting, is spent on reactive work like that, when you're reacting to things that have gone wrong or the unexpected, versus your planned projects, proactive stuff?
A lot less than it used to be, I would say.
Right.
So it's certainly far better, but you just have to respond to those things as they're appropriate. If anything happens to core trading systems, to call breakdown systems, I have to have an eye on it. Whilst I totally trust my team and they'll do all the right things, I've got to make sure they've got all the support they need and they've got all the responsiveness from the whole business around it. So I can't. I just have to make sure they've got the right level of support. It isn't that disruptive. I can focus on what I need to, but you can be sure that one of these things will happen just when I've got something important that is more strategic and planned to land, and that'll be the thing that gets blown off course, and I've got to work twice as hard to kind of bring that back. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more stability, and I'm kind of really happy with the level of stability we achieve.
Yeah.
But if something like that does happen, it needs attention. It's the stuff that we really care about because it's the experience.
So over the last 12 months, what is it? Is it about 70-30 split, or is it kind of less than that, would you say, in terms of the reacting?
Yeah, I'd say it's 30 or less, the reactive stuff, but
Yeah.
when it can take you out for a chunk.
Right. Yeah.
You might have a whole week where you're like, I've got to totally focus on this problem until it's nailed.
Yeah.
And then you're back to your 3 weeks
Yeah.
over here, just do it. I say just focusing on those,
Yeah.
setting out those priorities and making sure that we've got the runway to get on with those things.
I'm hoping that some of our audience watching this podcast will be aspiring CIOs. And are there any tips or piece of advice that you would give to somebody who was kind of at that stage where they were looking to progress into a CIO role, things they should be thinking about?
Being able to take technical problems and explain them to business communities is, at the end of the day, that I think is one of the core skills. Being able to make the complex simple, being someone who can make things simple, communicate simply, and set directions for a team and an organization around their technical capability. I'd also say don't force it. If it'll happen, if it'll happen. I think there's some. You might find actually that there is an alternative to that role that appeals to you more. If you set yourself very hard on, that's the role I want. If you just focus on the destination, make sure you enjoy the journey as well, because you might find other places you'd like to go on that journey. I suppose would be my reflection on it. That's
really good advice, actually, rather than just being totally focused on that end point. And now you're in that role, and what are the skills that you've needed to develop that you didn't anticipate you would need as a CIO?
That's quite a tricky one, I suppose. What did I not expect to have to deal with? There's not a lot I don't think I necessarily would expect to have to deal with, but I think it's the level at which you have to deal with it. The focus on the team, the focus on the availability, continuous improvement, being able to explain a clear strategy and show the evolution of that and the progress, so that you're able to tell that story to people in a way that they can engage with it, feel they can contribute to it, and we can start to see some of those milestones being ticked off. And then guess what? You've got to go back and start doing that again because you've achieved it now. So I think that continually talking about the strategy, the progress against that, but then also having to reset it and go, well, we've done that. Now we need to be thinking about what the next thing is. You're on this continuous journey. I think that's more time than I expected it to. It's not a BAU run activity. It is a bit. Some of that is a bit of the BAU run stuff, and there are cycles in the organisation that you run with. But to be constantly talking about what's coming next and how that's going to happen, that takes up quite a lot of time. Perhaps it was something that I should have seen, but it's probably the thing that surprised me the most. Right.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think that's really valuable for anybody that's watching. So moving on now to my last question. We always ask one of our previous CIOs a question for the next person who kind of sits in the chair.
Yeah.
And that question has come from Richard Gifford, who was CTO at the Ordnance Survey. And he's asked, and I don't mind if you need a bit of time to think about this, but how do you envisage the role of artificial intelligence in shaping the future of your organisation's IT strategy? And what ethical considerations are you prioritising to ensure responsible AI implementation?
Good question. I now I'm worried about having to think about my question.
It's a great question, and AI is on, I guess, the forefront of every CIO's strategy this year, but doing it, utilising it well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
There are some real opportunities for it in our business, and some of them we are already looking at. Match everything together in the most optimal way, and the machine learns that. And also, we have a lot of data that says, if Sarah's driving this particular car in these particular conditions, and this is the experience she's having, this is probably the issue. But then again, we can continue to refine what those causes may be and advise our patrols better to fix it. And ultimately, we might know before you break down what the issue is and tell you, we're going to be waiting for you here because you're about to break down, or don't break down, go straight to your garage because you need to fix these things. So that there's so much opportunity in the data and the insight that we have to really develop that kind of capability. I think in terms of the ethical question, I suppose that we have, and this is it's a challenge we have to look at quite regularly, which is, if you're in a dangerous location, how do we ensure that anyone in a dangerous location gets the right level of attention in the quickest possible circumstances? Can artificial intelligence really be sure that you're in what is your situation? Are you in a dangerous situation that wherefore we need to prioritize getting to you first? And I think that's the ethical dilemma that we have, that we can do a lot of stuff with artificial intelligence and machine learning, but at what point does a human have to intervene? Because the human will care about the situation you're in and will make sure that you need to know that a human has got you, sees you, and is looking out for you and trying to get someone there. It's not to say the machine can't do that, but I don't think we'd be prepared to take that risk yet with someone's safety.
Yeah, I guess the implications on your business are so huge with that. That is I guess, going to be a big consideration for you compared with a business that might use AI, I don't know, for something completely different, a retail organisation, or gaming, or whatever. This is,
I mean, giving you
life or death, it could be, couldn't it?
It could be, and sometimes it can be when we hear some of the patrol stories, and actually that they, if they get there at the right time, they prevent serious risk of injury. And we have to think about our patrols and making sure that they're safe too. So there's a lot of things we have to think about there. And can we rely on a machine making the best choice there? It could make a recommendation, but I think it would still need, at the moment, that human eye on it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Antony, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation and finding out more about you and kind of the pressures that you face and how you overcome them. It's been a really interesting chat. So thank you again.